Have you ever noticed how in some cartoons there are characters whose faces we never actually see? Their heads are cut off, their features are blurred, or they're awkwardly out of frame. Think of Miss Bellum from the Powerpuff Girls, Wizard Kelly from the Proud Family, the adults in Peanuts, or even Tom's owner in Tom and Jerry. At first glance, it's easy to assume that these are just simple character designs because these characters don't matter much to the story. But when you really think about it, these faceless characters are way more intentional than they seem. Cartoons, more than any other medium, uses exaggeration and visual imagery to tell deeper stories. Most details in animation aren't ever truly random, so when a character's face is hidden from us, there's usually a reason. Sometimes it's for humor, sometimes it's to shift the focus onto other characters, and sometimes it's to make a bigger point about identity, authority, or even how kids see the world. In this video, I'll break down a few of the most memorable faceless characters in animation and explore what they really represent. Because while they may be missing a face, they're definitely not missing a purpose. In a lot of cartoons, especially those aimed for children and told from a child's perspective, the facelessness really comes down to point of view. When the story is being filtered through a child's eyes, the adults often fade into the background. They're not the center of the story, so they don't need to be fully realized characters. Instead, they exist more like background noise or distant authority figures that kids don't fully understand. A perfect example of this is in Peanuts. In this show, not only do the adults have hidden faces, but they don't even speak real dialogue. Instead, their voices come through as the famous muffled sounds. And while that's a funny ongoing joke, it's also very intentional. The world of Peanuts is not about adults. It's about Charlie Brown, Lucy, Linus, Snoopy, and the rest of the kids. So the adults aren't really characters with story arcs. They're more like a presence in the background that shapes the environment without ever stepping into the spotlight. That's because the show is completely rooted in childhood perspective. When you think about it, most young kids don't process adult conversations word for word. They pick up on the tone, the mood, or just the fact that an adult is speaking. But the actual words don't always matter to them. So in the world of Charlie Brown, the muffled adult voices symbolizes just that. They're there, but they don't drive the story forward. The focus always stays on how the kids are navigating their own little world with their own problems, friendships, and lessons. This creative choice also keeps the storytelling universal. By not giving adults specific faces or voices, the audience doesn't get distracted by them. Instead, we stay connected to the innocence, humor, and struggles of childhood. That way, the message becomes clear. In the world of Peanuts, adults may exist, but childhood is where the story actually happens. The same goes for shows like Ed, and Eddy, where the adults are practically invisible. In fact, we almost never see or hear from them because the entire world of that show is built around kids and their point of view. Much like the Peanuts, the absence of the adults isn't a mistake or an oversight. It's very intentional. It's a way of saying this world belongs to the children. If you think about it, the entire show takes place in their neighborhood. It's like this little bubble of childhood freedom. The kids create their own society and economy with their own rules. And because the adults aren't there to step in or interfere, it allows the world to feel authentic to how kids see it themselves. Even in real life, children often feel like their neighborhood is its own universe where they're the ones in control. At least until the adults show up. Ed, and Eddy leans into that feeling by removing adults completely. Take almost any episode for instance. When Eddy is scheming up his latest scam to get money for jawbreakers, the obstacles he faces aren't always involving his parents grounding him or teachers punishing him. More often, it's the kids in the neighborhood. Whether it's Kevin shutting him down, the Kinker sisters causing chaos, or Double D pointing out the flaws in his plan, the conflicts always come from the kids themselves. And that's because in this world, the kids' relationships, rivalries, and imaginations are the only things that matter. By keeping the adults off screen, the creators force the audience to stay inside that bubble and experience the world exactly as a child would, full of exaggerated drama and creativity. Just like with the Peanuts, this decision makes the show timeless because it taps into something universal. Every kid at some point has felt like their neighborhood or their friend group was the entire world. Ed, and Eddy captures that perfectly by leaving the adults out of the picture. Facelessness can be deeper than just being from a kid's perspective. Sometimes it's metaphorical. A character's missing face can symbolize something bigger than just the quote-unquote, we don't need to see them. And one of the best examples is Wizard Kelly from the Proud Family. Wizard Kelly is one of those characters whose presence is always larger than life. He's tall, rich, powerful, and constantly cut off from the frame. His head is cropped out every single time we see him. And that choice is intentional. It's not that the animators couldn't draw his face. It's because his face honestly doesn't matter. He's not supposed to feel personal or relatable. He's supposed to represent an idea. Wizard Kelly is essentially a walking metaphor for wealth, capitalism, and influence. He's the embodiment of how money can make someone feel out of reach, literally and figuratively. If you really think about it, we never see his head because he's meant to be unattainable, towering over everyone else. He's the untouchable figure who controls so much of the world around the main characters. but we never get to connect with him as a person. And honestly, that's the whole point. The Proud family makes this clear through the way that his influence shows up. Almost everything in town seems to be owned by him. There's the Wizard Kelly Theaters, the Wizard Kelly Stadium, even Wizard Kelly school programs. Anything you can think of, he probably owns. He even sponsors events and competitions. His reach is everywhere, and it's almost comical how much the community revolves around his businesses. But when you think about it, that's exactly the point. Wizard Kelly doesn't need a face because his identity has been replaced by his money, brand, and empire. But Wizard Kelly's facelessness also represents something darker. He doesn't care about people. He only cares about his money. And because of that, the animators chose not to give him a face because that will humanize him. His lack of empathy is inhumane, and his selfishness defines him far more than any facial expression ever could. There are countless examples of this in the show. One of the most obvious is when Penny, La Cienega, Zoe, and Dejanay form a singing group called LPDZ. At first glance, it seems like Wizard Kelly is actually supporting their dreams by signing them to his label. But the truth comes out quickly. When he notices Penny is the true star of the group, he immediately drops Zoe, Dejanay, and La Cienega because he no longer sees them as profitable. Their value to him only existed in terms of money, and once that was gone, so was his interest. And when Penny finally chooses to terminate her contract, she walks away with nothing. Because hidden in the fine print, Wizard Kelly made it so that if she ever chose to leave, he would get every single penny. That entire episode is representation on how the music industry really works. How companies prioritize profit over people, and how artists often get chewed up and discarded in the process. We see that same type of greed play out again in the Proud family Louder and Prouder. In the episode where Oscar takes out a loan from Wizard Kelly to fund his theme park Snackland, it looks like just for a moment, Wizard Kelly might be doing something kind for once. But of course, it's all a setup. When Oscar later receives a $500,000 compensation check, Wizard Kelly takes it all for himself, claiming that it's repayment for the loan. What Oscar didn't realize is that Wizard Kelly had loaded the loan with outrageous interest. So by the end of the day, Oscar supposedly owed him the $500,000 that he had just received. This was all a trap. Wizard Kelly never had good intentions. He was perfectly fine with watching Oscar sink under a mountain of debt if it means he got to grow his own pockets. And that's just not a silly plot. It's symbolic of unfortunate loan practices in the real world, where companies exploit people with impossible interest rates just to squeeze more money out of them. That's what makes Wizard Kelly such an effective faceless character. His missing face reflects not just his wealth and power, but also the lack of humanity. He's a reminder that when money becomes someone's entire identity, empathy and compassion fall away, leaving only an untouchable, faceless presence that dominates everything around them. Facelessness can also reflect emotional absence. Sometimes it isn't about power or money, it's about distance. In Foster's home for imaginary friends, we never really see Mac's mom's face. She exists only as a voice, a presence in the background, but never a full character. And that creative choice says a lot. It's not just about convenience and animation. It's a visual metaphor for her role in Mac's life. She's not truly connected to him in a meaningful way. To Mac, she's more of an obstacle than a parent. This is a really powerful way of showing how children sometimes experience their parents. Not as full, complex people that they can confide in, but as distant authority figures who feel impossible to reach emotionally. And when you break it down, that's exactly how Mac's relationship with his mom plays out. At its core, their dynamic is distant and almost neglectful. And it's not that his mom is openly cruel or abusive, she's just emotionally absent. She isn't tuned in to what Mac needs. And when she does step into the picture, her attention is often directed towards his older brother Terrence instead. Terrence bullies Mac consistently, yet his mom doesn't step in or even seem to notice. And that leaves Mac feeling unprotected in his own home. That kind of neglect is his own form of harm. It pushes him to look for comfort and validation somewhere else. And that somewhere else is Blue. In the pilot episode, we see how this is clearly laid out. Mac's mom tells him that he's too old for an imaginary friend and insists on him getting rid of Blue. Instead of recognizing how much Blue means to her son, or how Blue feels an important emotional role in his life, she dismisses it entirely. To her, Blue is a problem to solve, not a sign of her son's emotional needs. And because of that, Mac is forced to find a solution on his own, taking Blue to Foster's home. That one moment speaks volumes. It shows just how little his mom understands him, and how Mac has to carry the weight of protecting his own happiness without her support. And then there's the issue of unfair treatment. Time and time again, Terrence is given the benefit of doubt. He's older, louder, and much more aggressive. But instead of noticing and correcting his behavior, Mac's mom either ignores it or enables it by siding with him. For Mac, that means not only is he left to deal with Terrence's bullying alone, but he also doesn't get the reassurance that his mom is in his corner. That silence and refusal to step in says as much about their relationship as her absence from the screen. And speaking of her absence, that's another huge part of the puzzle. After the pilot, Mac's mom hardly appears in the series. The writers keeps her in the margins, which isn't accidental. Narratively, she's not meant to be a reliable emotional anchor. Instead, Foster's home itself becomes Mac's true support system. Frankie is the one who takes on the kind of older sister role. Madame Foster represents wisdom and acceptance. And characters like Wilt show Mac the kind of patience and kindness that he doesn't get at home. In a way, Foster's is more of a family to Mac than his actual family is. And when you put all of this together, you see that Mac's mom's facelessness is doing a double duty. On the surface, it's a stylistic choice, but beneath, it's a metaphor for how invisible she feels in Mac's emotional world. He clearly wants a connection and care, but she's too detached and dismissive to provide it. That's why Blue matters so much to this story. He isn't just an imaginary friend. He's a stand-in for all of the things that Mac is missing at home. Blue provides stability, unconditional support, laughter, fun, and is someone who always takes Mac's side. So when you really look at it, Mac's mom doesn't need a face, because to Mac, she isn't fully there. Her absence, both visually and emotionally, is what defines their relationship. And that's a perfect example of how faceless characters can represent something so deep than just a missing design choice. They can embody the way that children experience neglect, distance, and a longing for someone to truly see them. And then, there are the rare moments where faceless characters reveal their faces. That's when it really matters. In the Powerpuff Girls, Miss Bellum's face is almost never shown. But there are a few times where it is, and it's carefully chosen. It's usually when she's comforting the girls, giving them advice, or stepping into a more motherly figure. And that choice is very intentional. By only showing her face in those moments, the animators add intimacy. It's like them saying she isn't just a symbol of mystery or professionalism. She's a person and someone who truly cares. One of the best examples of this comes from the episode titled Something's Amiss. In this episode, Miss Bellum goes undercover and actually becomes the one that stops Sedusa. In this episode, we get a glimpse of her eyes and her face. And it's not just for the gag of the disguise. It's because the plot relies on her stepping out of the background and becoming a more central, active figure and saving the day. For once, she isn't just a faceless voice of reason whispering to the mayor. She becomes the hero. And in that moment, her face being shown reinforces her agency. It tells us that she's not just a symbol in the background for the girls. She's a person capable of stepping forward and making a difference. Another subtle but really powerful example happens in the episode titled The Rowdy Rough Boys. After the girls fight the boys and get completely overwhelmed, it's Mrs. Bellum who steps in. Not with superpowers, but with wisdom. She explains to the girls that they can't beat the boys with force, but instead they need to use a more softer, more emotional approach. In that scene, parts of her face, like her eyes and her mouth, are revealed while she's giving that advice. The framing changes because that moment isn't about her being a mysterious adult in the background anymore. It's about her being something like a motherly figure, passing down guidance that the girls can actually grow from. By letting the audience see this part of her face, it builds intimacy. It's almost like it's inviting us as viewers to lean in closer and hear her wisdom. There are also moments sprinkled throughout the series where Miss Bellum leans down to the girls' level, comforting them in ways that the mayor or even the professor can't. Often, that's when you'll catch a glimpse of her mouth or her eyes. In these moments, it's like the show is saying that when Miss Bellum is fulfilling the motherly role, when she's not just the mayor's assistant, but essentially a caregiver to the girls, she's more humanized. She gets a face because in that moment, she's more than a symbol. She becomes family. And what makes this so impactful is that it's so rare. For majority of the series, Miss Bellum is faceless. She's tall, glamorous, and mysterious, and her head is always cut out of the frame. So when we get those rare glimpses of her face, it feels very important. It's a narrative tool. The absence of her face is what makes it more meaningful when we actually get a chance to see it. And that's what makes her such a fascinating faceless character. She isn't faceless because she's irrelevant. She's symbolic. But in the few moments where she steps into a motherly figure or a quiet hero, the mystery fades, and she becomes something more real. The choice to show her face in those moments creates contrast. It transforms her from the faceless secretary into someone who matters deeply to the Powerpuff Girls' growth. So when we see Miss Bellum's face, it means something. It's not random, it's storytelling. It's intimacy, guidance, and comfort. It's the show letting us know that beneath all of the mystery, there's a warm, human presence that the girls can rely on. So when you watch a cartoon and you see a faceless character, it's probably not just a silly design. It's a narrative tool. Sometimes it's about perspective, like in Peanuts or Ed, Edd n Eddy, where the facelessness reminds us that childhood is its own little world, and adults are more like distant noise than real people. Sometimes it's about power and greed, like Wizard Kelly, where facelessness turns into a metaphor for wealth, exploitation, and how money can make someone feel untouchable and even inhuman. And other times it's about emotional distance, like Mac's mom from Foster's Home of Imaginary Friends, where not showing her face reflects how invisible she feels in his emotional world. But then you get moments like Miss Bellum, where the absence of a face makes for a reveal that's super powerful. When she leans down to comfort the girls, or steps in as a quiet hero, her face is important. She becomes a real person that the audience can connect with, and that's the beauty of it. Faceless characters live in the spaces between presence and absence. They're not fully there, but the way they're withheld is intentional. They force us to pay attention not to the individual, but to what they represent: authority, power, neglect, distance, or care. Because when you think about it, some of the most influential forces in our lives don't have faces either. Systems, industries, cultural expectations, they shape us, but we can't exactly point to one person and say, that's the face of it all. Faceless characters capture that truth in a way that's simple but brilliant. So the next time you see a cartoon character whose head is cropped out, whose features are blurred, or whose face is hidden, don't just brush it off as a design quirk. Ask yourself why. Chances are, their missing face is telling you something much bigger about the world of the story. It may be even about the world outside of it.